Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kendall Trump with Grain Journal Magazine in Decatur, Illinois. Welcome to FDA Inspector Visits, Know Your Rights and What to Expect. This is the 10th in a series of webinars to be presented by GEAPS and Grain Journal Magazine in 2018. With the new Food Safety Modernization Act regulations in place, the grain industry can expect an increase in Food and Drug Administration inspections. Today's webinar will provide an explanation of the forms FSA auditors use, aspects they look for in a facility, and what qualifications a competent technician is required to have. Managers, supervisors, and quality and safety directors will also benefit from learning the rights companies have throughout the inspection process and what samples and documents auditors can take. This session reviews Perry Nettles' presentation from GEAPS Exchange 2018. We hope to see you at GEAPS Exchange 2019, which will be held March 9th through 12th in New Orleans, Louisiana. This webinar has been approved for 1/10 of a continuing education unit, or CEU. If you already hold a credential with GEAPS and K-State, you are welcome to participate in this webinar, complete a short assessment, and earn 1/10 of a CEU towards the maintenance of your credential. For more information or to receive the quiz link, please email Melissa at melissa@geeps.com. Today's webinar is sponsored by VAA LLC, who has provided engineering and design services in the agribusiness industry since presenter today is Perry Nettles. Perry is Vice President of Operations at Food Protection Services and is an Associate Certified Entomologist. Perry grew up on a rice and soybean farm in Jonesboro, Arkansas. He worked for 9 years as a sanitation and pest control manager at Post Cereals and then moved on to sanitation manager and heat treatment coordinator at Quaker Oats in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Perry then jumped to the other side of the fence and began doing commercial pest control and fumigation at Food Protection Services. He has been with them for the past 12 years and is now VP of Operations. Perry has been involved with GEAPS for over 10 years, serves as GEAPS Delta Region Vice President, serves on the GEAPS Associate Board of Directors, GEAPS International Chapter Resource Committee, is an Associate Certified Entomologist, and serves on the Food Protection Alliance QA Committee. Please feel free to ask questions today by typing them into the questions box at the right-hand side of your screen at any time during our webinar. We will be answering your questions during a Q&A session following the presentation. We do have one polling question for you today. How many people are viewing at your facility? Thank you for your participation. As a note, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website, grainnet.com, within 24 hours. All registrants will also receive an email with a link to the recording. Perry, at this time, can you please do a voice check?
Yes, good morning, Kendall.
Good morning. We can hear you perfectly. And now, can you please show us your opening slide? Ladies and gentlemen, here is Perry Nettles.
All right, good morning, everyone. Today's presentation, we're covering FDA inspections that are focused mainly on the grain elevators. There's been a large push for these with the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act since 2011. Start out the presentation like I did at GEAPS last year. I've been in the grain industry for pretty much my entire life. I do not work for FDA. I'm not an attorney. I don't do litigations for these types of audits or anything. I have a lot of customers in the grain handling industry, and there's been a lot of questions asked towards us about the regulations and what's coming. So what we started doing was compiling all of the reports from all of our customer base in the grain industry and what they're seeing from these auditors, what the auditors are looking for when they come to the facilities. So what I'm presenting on is not the 7 rules or, you know, the foreign supplier verification program or the food rule, the feed rule, or intentional adulteration. I'm just going to review kind of what our people in the field are seeing, what our customers are dealing with, and review that with some of you so that you'll have a better basis of what to take back to your teams. So as we all know, Food Safety Modernization Act came out in 2011. Like most rules and regulations with the government, signed into law in 2011, and it's taken them 6-7 years to finally get it all in place, figure out what the rules actually meant, how to actually interpret all of the laws that they wrote, and now we're getting to deal with it today. So a lot of the things with FSMA come about through FDA and how they've interpreted a lot of things over the years. In the past, it was more reactionary. Something would happen, and then they would write a rule about it. Somebody would get sick, and then there would be a new HACCP plan put in place for, you know, the Odwalla unpasteurized juices back years ago. So the whole purpose of FSMA is to get away from being reactionary and being more proactive. So that's what we're going to look at here. Real quick history. I don't want to get too deep into this. A little history on food safety. 1905, Upton Sinclair writes a book about the horrific safety working conditions in the meat packing plants in Chicago. People read this and were appalled by the lack of unsanitary conditions that their meats were being produced in. So in true FDA form, the next year they reacted and wrote a law. So the Pure Food and Drug Act was one of our first major laws that really protected the food in the U.S. And the verbiage in that law is still in the Food Safety Modernization Act in 2011. And the last 3 words of this slide is what you need to be focused on. May is the key word. May become adulterated. We're going to talk about this quite a bit more throughout the proceeding. So from 1906 to 1938, there was not a lot of changes made. 1938, they changed it to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Women were applying a lot more makeup, powders, things to their faces. It was unregulated. So I thought they should put some verbiage around that. So 38, we get the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. From 38 to 2011, almost 75 years, no huge changes, major changes were made to the food laws governing the food that we eat in the United States. There were different HACCP regulations written. There were some addendums made to it. But no major overhaul to our food safety regulations in 75 years. And people say, you know, bureaucracy, too much oversight, get them out of our business. They're drowning in regulations. But, you know, this one I kind of feel was a little bit justified that we haven't updated our rules in 75 years, and it was probably time for a little change. A lot of the themes of the legislation are prevention-based, import safety, protecting the food before it gets to the U.S., inspections and compliance, and partnerships. They've been really good about working with facilities during these initial audits at these grain elevators. Now, you know, I'm not blind to the fact that they've had to hire, you know, quadruple their staff at FDA to do all these audits with FSMA regulations implemented. So I don't, in my own personal opinion, there's probably going to be fines coming out soon to help pay for some of that additional headcount because they didn't get all the funding that they requested. So just my 2 cents, take it for what it's worth. FSMA is a minty, tentacled beast. It gets into a lot of different pieces. Everybody wanted to have a part of it, have their say-so in it, and it gets very deep and very broad when you look at it from a 10,000-foot view like this. So let's get into what the real purpose of the call here. What are the major changes? So effective immediately, FDA can do mandatory recalls if there's reasonable probability that food is adulterated. Blows my mind that our government for the last 75 years, they could go in and do an audit, know that food was being produced that was adulterous to humans, and that they couldn't do anything about it. They had to go to a judge, get a stop work order in the middle of the night, try to get an injunction against the facility, get it shut down. And now they can just go in and shut them down and do a recall, which is amazing. They should have had this authority a long time ago, but that's one of the main things, that they can actually do recalls for the first time ever. They can also access and copy all of your facility records. Let me say that again. They can copy all of your facility records as long as it pertains to the commodities or the foods that are being stored at your facility. They can't get into employee personnel records and look at personal stuff, but anything that has to do with the food that's being stored at your facility, they can look at those records and they can make copies of those records and take them with them. Processing, packaging, distribution, receipt, holding, or import of all foods at your facility. That's a major change. So, again, think about, in our line of work, if we're fumigating or applying pesticides around a grain facility, in the back of our mind is, if something would ever happen, knock on wood, it hasn't in the years, but if it does, is all of your paperwork ready to be looked at by an attorney and go to court and be subpoenaed, and it kind of like that here is your record keeping in place so that when an FDA audit comes in, you can easily access all of your records pertaining to those commodities and give them a copy of it and feel confident that FDA has copies of your records and your record keeping and that you don't have anything to worry about. So training, the big question here is around training. Everybody calls and says, what's the training module? What training module do we have to have? Well, there's not one. FDA said your people need to be trained by a competent person on food safety, and they kind of left it vague on purpose. They didn't say that everybody has to have these modules, this training, but competent on food safety. So all of your employees, when they're hired, should have some initial training and then annual training after that. Document that training. What about all of your part-time seasonal laborers that are coming in? The guy that you brought in just to work the truck dump and to clean up after the truck pulls off. Does he know that that's a food commodity? Does he wrap his head around the fact that everything that's getting dumped out of that truck and that he's sweeping off of that dump pit edges, that somebody's going to eat one day, or an animal's going to eat it, and then we're going to eat that animal? That's got to be the mindset, and what we put in these people's minds is that, yes, it's a massive facility. Yes, there's 10 million bushels of grain being stored here, but somebody is going to eat every bit of this in some form or fashion. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing here. So do some initial training, even if seasonal help, some type of annual refresher training after that, document the training, and then contractor training. All of the welders, the fabricators, the electricians, everybody you bring on your site. A quick one-page thing, here's your basic GMPs. This is a food storage facility. Do you understand the food risk about, contaminating that product and being safe working around those food products? So document your contractor training as well. That one gets missed quite a bit. Refer back to just your CGMPs, your current good manufacturing practices. CFR 21 CFR 117 describes the methods, equipment, facilities, and controls for producing food or feed. If you just look through that, get the highlights out of it, and as long as you show the FDA inspector that you're doing some type of food safety training with your people, that's what they're asking for. Just that there's a good overall awareness that the people understand good manufacturing practices, storing grain that's going to be used for human consumption at a later date. So now we know what all the changes are. We know how we got to these changes, what a little bit of the background and history is. So now it's inspection time. So the auditor shows up, and what was it? The Bioterrorism Act. We all had to go through and register every facility that we have in the United States that stores grain. Even if it's an off-site unmanned warehouse that we, fill up, a couple of million bushels of grain in a flat storage or in some bins and kind of lock it up and don't come back to it again for a few months, maybe go back occasionally and pull some samples. But they have a list of all of those as well. And there's several customers that have gotten a call, and the auditor is sitting in the parking lot of this unmanned facility waiting for somebody to come let them in. These are unannounced audits. They're going to show up, be sitting in the parking lot, and say, it's time for the audit. Here we go. So the auditor will arrive, and that auditor is going to have a Form 482 in his hand. It is a 3-page document. I got it pulled up here on the screen. The Form 482 just says, here, I'm officially with the FDA. He's going to show you his badge. You should ask for his badge. It's kind of kind of a little test that the FDA likes to do. If they want to do an audit, say they would like to see your credentials, your badge, they'll show it to you gladly. They're going to show you the Form 482. It looks real basic and unassuming. And up here at the top of the Form 482, it says, you know, the name of the company, the city, who the inspector is, that they're coming there to do an FDA inspection. If you look way down, and FDA, you know, they inspect everything, medical devices, tobacco, x-ray machines, the list goes on and on. Subsection 704, Part B, I want to get back to this, what I mentioned earlier, completion of the audit. I'm going to go down to about subsection Part 2 of subsection 704, Part B, whatever you want to call it. It says that where any product has been prepared, packed, or held under insanitary conditions whereby it may have become adulterated with filth or whereby it may have become rendered injurious to health. So this verbiage from 1906 is in this Form 482 for an FDA auditor in 2018 that says that not only the auditor doesn't necessarily have to find your commodity in a filthy, in a you know, in a rotten state, in a contaminated state, you know, covered. It says where it may be held, where it may become adulterated. So where it may have become contaminated with filth. So it's the auditor's discretion that that grain is being stored in such a way that it may become adulterated with filth. Not that it is, but that it may be. So that's a big turning point in this, where that later on when you're getting your either your employee inspection or your establishment inspection report or your Form 483, which is a failure, that term may really comes into play here. So, you know, if there's busted out windows on the top of your Texas floor on your head house on your grain elevator, so, and he sees pigeons flying around, well, maybe there's not pigeon feces in your grain. There's a good chance that it could, or that it may become adulterated. So that's where those things come into play, is that term, that one word "may," that's been around for 120 years in this language, is still haunting us today, where it's not necessarily has to be adulterated, but that it may become adulterated. All right, so auditor shows up, he's sitting at your gate, he has his Form 482, and he wants to speak to the person in charge. Do all of your people know what to say and not to say to an FDA auditor? Do your employees know not to engage with that auditor, not to answer any questions? Say, let me get the inspector, let me get the, you know, our competent person to speak to you. Who is your designated, competent, and trained contact for each location? You know, if it's just one district manager that covers 8 locations, then that auditor is not going to be too happy when he waits 5 hours for that person to get there to do the inspection with them. Normally, each site has at least one person designated, or maybe that person's over a couple of sites that are, you know, within a close proximity of each other. What about during harvest, when everybody is covered up? When somebody is on vacation, do you have a backup for that trained person? Does that person know what to say and how to talk to the FDA inspector to only answer the questions, not give more information, only give a brief answer of what's asked for? So once the inspector says that they're on site, you figure out who your trained and competent designated person is, that knows your facility, that knows the operations and the functions of what you're storing there. Then you're going to kind of do the inspection. The auditor is going to ask for a little bit of paperwork and look at, do you do interstate or intrastate commodities? Are you buying across state lines, which almost everybody does? But if it's intrastate, then it's a little bit, you know, less on the oversight than if you're shipping across state lines. They'll start digging a little more. From everyone that I've spoken to, sanitation is one of their key focuses. These guys are trying to understand our world because they're either fresh out of college and FDA school on doing their inspections, or their last 20 years have been focused around inspecting meat plants, poultry plants, and food processing facilities. And now they're showing up to a grain elevator, and they've had some coaching on it, but these inspectors are trying to take this in because they're not really used to our world here in the grain elevator. So they're focusing on sanitation. Pest control has been almost the top category on all the deficiencies noted that I've seen. Quality control of the product that you're storing and what you're doing to maintain that quality as you store that product, and then your record keeping. That's been the 4 major hits that we have seen. Again, this is not from the FDA report. This is just from our customer database through Arkansas all the way up through Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. So the primary grain belt. These are the things that our customers are saying they're seeing on their inspection reports once the report's finished. So sanitation. Do you have any type of cleaning frequency? Are you going from an allergen in a bin to a non-allergen? Are you putting wheat in a bin and then rice in that same bin right after it's emptied out? So do you have any sort of cleaning frequency? And maybe it's not a cleaning frequency. Maybe it's an inspect and clean as necessary policy. So once the bin's empty, you stick a flashlight in it, you look, you don't see any major buildup or bridging, you sign off on the sheet. The bin was on your bin pull sheet. Once it's emptied, there's a line at the bottom, was bin inspected and or cleaned? Yes. So now that covers you from a sanitation inspection frequency standpoint. But no matter what you do, you just have to do what you say you do. Are you doing what you say you're doing? Make sure you have that documented, that if your policy says you're inspecting the bins once they're emptied, then have proof of that. If you're saying that you get inside and physically clean your bins out once a year, be careful on that, because if you store that wheat for a second year or the market's not right and you're sitting on it for a couple of years, then it should be annually or once as soon as the bin is emptied. And then have something that says, yes, you went in, you pulled the grates, you swept out the aeration ducts, you cleaned the walls, and that you did some sanitation on the bin to help prevent, retard the insect growth or to prevent cross-contamination. So, if you train your employees on what to look for from a sanitation standpoint, and did you document that training? Again, do just a quick training. I love lunch and learns, bring in some pizza. Everybody loves a good pizza break. For $50, you can bring in pizza, feed your whole crew, do a quick FSMA orientation, FDA training, sanitation training, and document it all. Pest management has gotten a lot of hits. They're trying to relate that to the food plants, where that if they see, hardly any stored product pest in the facility, then it's cause for alarm. Where we know with the grain elevators, there's going to be a lot more activity around those. So whether it's outsourced or in-house, 2 main things that we've seen the biggest hits on. Do you have any sort of approved pesticide list? Has somebody reviewed all of the products that you're using around your facility and make sure and read the label and understands the product, and is it safe to use around commodities and stored grain? Put that list together and let your facilities know this is the only products you should be using. We've all been around for many years in this industry. We know the commonplace is, saw a mouse around it's usually just around the office. That's when people start getting upset, is when they see the mice in the offices around the elevators. They don't say a lot, but you start seeing activity around your facility. You run down to the co-op. Yeah, they got big buckets of the good stuff. You take it out at your facility and throw it out, kind of haphazardly. Throw some here, throw some up in this false ceiling, call it good. You can't really do that. So you've got to have some records on what can be used around your food plants, and application records for all the insecticides and rodenticides that you're using. So this is just a generic approved pesticide list that we did for some customers. It doesn't have to be this in depth, but put a list together. Have your corporate quality director or somebody that's familiar with the facilities and what products can and can't be used, and reading these pesticide labels, and put a quick sheet together for maybe just your fumigants and residual insecticides. Here it just says fumigants, and then below it is just some rodenticides that can be used. And let your employees know if it can be used in a food area of a facility or a non-food area. Quick reference guide, just say let all your facilities know. That way you know each one of your facilities is using the same products, and you know that you're safe and that they're all approved for use in those locations. And then once you give them all a list, you all have your list of products to use, you have to track all of your products that are being used. When you put out your rodenticides, have a quick sheet put together. This is a real basic, Excel spreadsheet. And make it even easier for the people that are applying the product. Have this left-hand column filled out all the way with the EPA number. So then on the right, all they have to fill in is the date and then maybe this amount used box right here, how many blocks they put out. So just something that says, these are the products that we think should be used around your facilities, that we know have read the labels, we know they're safe to use, and then something showing where all they were applied. If you're doing a weekly spraying around your bunkers or around your flats, around the aeration fans with Tempo or some other residual insecticide with some Sentinel and Dicon, whatever the products are, do not mean to push any specific products. I'll put that disclaimer out there. But have some type of record showing where you sprayed at. We sprayed a half a gallon of finished product, finished solution around flat storage building 23 today. Just some sort of record, and when the auditors see this, they're just going to blow right past it and keep on moving to something else. They know that you have your program together, that you're aware of the risk associated with pests and rodenticides at your facility, and that you're taking corrective actions, and that you're being proactive, and that you're trying to keep the pressures down before it, actually targets your commodities. Take a quick breath here. Grain quality. I've seen this come up on a couple of different audits. So does everyone, have you done training with your employees on your grain quality? So a lot of times the sample shack, it gets hectic during harvest. Somebody didn't show up. We grab somebody out of the front office, stick them in a sample shack for the day. They're pulling samples of all the commodity coming in. Are they trained on how to do that and do it in the same fashion for every single truck that comes in, so you get the same results and the same grade from all of your customers? Have they been trained on, you pull a sample from the front, the middle, and the back of the truck, and then you go all the way down the middle hopper down to the bottom towards the gate? A simple one-page, flat page paper on how to, an SOP or a DPS, detailed process sheet, on how to inspect a grain truck. Pull 3 samples. After you pull the samples, do your moisture, do a weight, do a, shake it in the sifter pan. So is there a simple process to ensure that the grain, your front line of defense, that you're protecting the grain coming into your facility, and that everybody's doing it the same way, so that some grain that's, off grade isn't getting mixed in with your good quality grain? So your initial testing process, you get your sample in, you have your weight, so you're going to run it through your moisture analyzer. And I've seen this, it went down at a facility in Arkansas. So he says, yeah, they pull the sample, and then we get our cut out of that, have that composite, and then we weigh it, and then we do our moisture analyzer on it. And the guy says, okay, well, show me your training procedures on how to run the moisture analyzer. Oh, well, we just all know how to use it. Well, that's kind of a given in most places, but is there a little procedure that you have to use? Are there different ones in that location? When's the last time that moisture analyzer was calibrated? Do you have calibration records for that moisture analyzer? Even going so far back in the days when I worked in the food plants, did the person that calibrated that moisture analyzer have the proper credentials to be working on that? Do you have those credentials? They haven't gotten that far, but it's some of the things that they're looking for is, are you aware of the process that you're doing, or are you just going through the motions? Do you have a basic training module? Can you prove that these people were trained to it, and is everybody following the same procedures? Periodic inspections of the product that you have in storage. Are you doing walks of your flat storages? Are you pulling probe samples out of your bunkers? Are you checking for, do you have temperature recordings of temperature tables inside your bins? Do you have recordings of all of those to make sure that you don't have hot spots of insect activity, or maybe some out of condition grain with some high temps? Are you doing any type of moisture monitoring throughout your ground piles? Are you getting water seepage in through the sidewalls? So what are you doing to maintain that quality of that grain once you get it on site? Record keeping can go a million different ways. If you're organized, if you have it, easily presentable, a lot of it's electronic now, which is phenomenal. What I like about electronic is, and we've learned this through even the pest industry and doing audits, and if you have an electronic, everything's filed electronically, the auditor only gets to see that specific thing that they ask for. If they ask for your pest control records, you just pull out a big old book and lay it on the table, then they can just thumb through that book for hours looking at different stuff. But if they say, let me see your application record, then you can just pull up that one document and show it to them. So if everything's electronic, it makes it a lot smoother, it makes the process easier. You're not hiding anything from the auditor, but you're only giving them exactly what they ask for. So your inbound grain sampling records, inbound and outbound BOLs. I've seen them make several copies of the BOLs. They don't really ask a lot of questions about the BOLs, just what the commodity was, where it came from. And they usually take a couple of copies of the BOLs. Again, testing equipment procedures, the employee CGMP training, basic food safety training. Are they trained on GMPs about, not intentionally adulterating the food or not letting, contaminants fall into the food stream, and protecting the grain on top of the bin floors, and not sweeping the floor sweepings with possible pigeon feces and other things into a bin with a good commodity. Maybe you have a feed bin that all that goes into. But do they understand those processes? Have they been trained that, again, everything that they're handling and touching, somebody is going to eat one of these days? And I've seen, I would say, a third of the FDA audits that our customers have had, they've taken some sort of copies of some sort of the pest management records, whether it was a label for a product that was used, application records. If it was a contract company, sometimes they take, copies of the actual service agreement and how often the facility is treated. They like fumigation records. They ask a lot of questions about fumigants and about the grain protectants that are being applied, because you're actually applying that pesticide to the commodity. So they're wanting to see those application records and taking a lot of copies of those. All right, so after the inspection is done, all fingers crossed, and we're seeing some crazy things on some of these reports. Again, these auditors, I think, are trying to really grasp what they should be looking for and not looking for in these facilities inspections. So there's three things you may receive after the inspection. So as soon as the inspection's over, the auditor will kind of review his findings with you. And then if there's nothing major or outstanding, they'll send you an EIR, Establishment Inspection Report. That is awesome. That is thumbs up, amen, we're going to celebrate tonight. Nothing major, no major findings, maybe some very minor comments or follow-ups, but everything went good. It's just their observations, maybe some recommendations, but no violations. So when you get your EIR, you want to, if there's any comments or actionable items, you want to follow up on that immediately. Try to get stuff corrected, usually before the auditor even leaves if you can. So, kind of focus with the auditor. Make sure that any of their comments, if you can, grab some people, get something corrected before they even leave. It just shows good faith. Sometimes they'll even take it out of the report if it's already corrected before they leave. But EIRs are good. It's just saying, hey, we were here, you're good, no major violations, stamp it, probably won't see you again for another few years. So that means that's your facility, that location to them gets put in a file, you're in good graces. It could get pulled on a random pull, but it's probably going to be at the bottom of the list because everything was good. All right, Form 483 is bad. If the auditor is going to tell you you're going to be issued a Form 483, this just means that there's been evidence found that the product is contaminated, that there's potential for, a hold on that product, that it may need to be recalled or, subjected to some more further testing, and that they don't want you to move that commodity or do anything with it, or that there's been major violations observed. So Form 483, I don't have any grain customers to date that have received a Form 483. 483s are major violations, major issues. So if you receive a Form 483, there's going to be a lot of follow-up, a lot of digging, and a lot of response back to FDA, and then there's going to be a follow-up visit to make sure everything was corrected. The last thing that you will receive, I get asked a lot about samples and what they can and can't do. If an FDA auditor wants to pull some samples and take them with them, they are well within their right to pull those samples. They'll issue a Form 484. That 484 says that they have obtained a sample. It'll state on the form what size sample, what they pulled, and that kind of stuff. So they can give you a receipt describing the samples obtained. The main takeaway from this is if an auditor pulls a sample of something, there's probably a reason they want that sample. And you want to make sure that you have an exact sample for yourself. So if an auditor takes a big giant scoop of grain out of a ground pile, if you take a scoop of grain right beside that scoop, that may not be the same scoop that the auditor got. So it is you have every right to tell the auditor that once he pulls that sample that you want half of his sample. So he may get a little bit bigger sample, but that way you know whatever he's taking with him to have further testing done on, that you have half of that sample as well to do your own independent testing on. And I would recommend if they take samples, get half of your sample, send it out to an independent lab, and start having it tested for, you know, anything, mycotoxins, pesticide residues, anything you can have it tested for. But again, they are well within their right to ask for samples of any of your commodities, but you also have the same right to ask for half of their sample. That way you know that you're getting half of the exact same sample that they're taking off site with them. So at the end of the day, once the audit's over, an EIR is cause for celebration. Form 483 is going to be bad. It's going to be headaches. It's going to be a lot of follow-up and a lot of corrective actions. And a Form 484 just means they took something and that, you know, they took part of your commodity off-site. I've even seen them get petty and try to issue receipts and payment forms, and it gets crazy. But I would not worry about any of that. Just get half of their samples so you can do your own independent testing. You don't want to be blindsided by something later on that they found something wrong with your product that you were unaware of. So kind of wrapping this one up, I went through it a little quicker than I did at GEAPS. I had a little more time at GEAPS, and with as many people as we had logged in today, I want to leave a little bit more time for questions today. But do you have your competent people identified for all of your locations? Are they comfortable enough? Are they ready to sit down and be the face of your company in the face of an FDA inspection? And these auditors have not been horrible. They've not been the three-headed dragons. They've been pretty good to work with so far. I feel that they're doing more training than they are really writing violations or fines. But I've also seen some heinous, some crazy things written on some inspection reports. I just had one a couple of weeks ago. The auditor wrote in their inspection report, you know, again, not a Form 483, but just the inspection report, that the trash dumpster that was by the main office, which was, you know, several hundred yards away from any buildings or bins, the trash dumpster was sitting on the ground and did not have a lid on it. And that by not having a lid, it could be an attractant for rodents that could infest the facility and the commodities. And that was the FDA auditor's takeaway from what he saw at this grain facility. So immediately they got it put on a concrete pad and got lids on it, of course. But I mean, that's some of the things that they're seeing and they're reporting in their audits. I mean, a lot of the things they see are very justified. But some things, it's like they're just reaching and grasping to put something in their audit for some content. And again, I think they're really still trying to understand our world of grain commodity storage and what we do with these products. Competent trained person to represent your facility. Sanitation programs are in place, that you're doing sanitation around your facility. You don't have spilled grain to promote insect or rodent harborage around your facility. What are your pest control records? What are you doing to keep insects out of the grain, to inspect the grain, to make sure there's no insects in it, and to keep the rodents out of your bins? And also the birds. There was another one, auditor wrote that they observed birds flying over the grain elevator. Not in the elevator, not in the flat storage building, not on the Texas floor, not on the dump pit, but flying over the facility. What his point was in that comment, I'm still confused, but keeping all of the windows or screens closed on the top floor of your Texas floor for your dump pits, making sure that all of your drag conveyors, your belt conveyors are enclosed to keep bird droppings off of the belts. That all falls under pest control as well. Quality control of your product coming in, proper procedures to sample that grain, and then procedures to keep the grain in good quality once it's in storage, and then your record keeping. I mean, if you don't have a record of it, you didn't do it. If you do training with all your people and don't document it and have them sign off, to an auditor, you never did the training. Record keeping is paramount to these inspections. If you start pulling out, document after document, this is how we train people, this is where this person was trained, and have records of these annual training events or new hire trainings, the auditor is going to go much, much smoother. They're going to see that you have your programs in place, and usually the walkthrough goes much quicker. They're not as detailed and digging as much during their on-site walkthrough because they already feel that your programs are in place. So in conclusion, that's the wrap up, and I will turn it back over to Kendall or to the group for any questions.
Thank you so much for a great presentation today, Perry. This concludes the presentation portion of today's event. We will now begin our Q&A session. If you have not yet submitted your questions, please do so at this time. Okay, Perry, our first question today. We are using the FDA Food Safety Plan Builder. Is this the one to use, or are there better ones?
No, I've had several customers that have been through that module and put that together. I've done some research with the customers, with 3 different customers on that program. I would say that from what I've seen, I don't know of a better one on the market. And if you can show that you're using that one at your facilities, it would be put you head and shoulders above most facilities. It's completely all-inclusive. So I highly recommend that program.
Okay. Next, how much of an inspection focus is there on export elevators versus internal elevators?
Oh, good question. We're seeing more of the, it seems like the auditors started more inland. I don't know if they wanted to cut their teeth on some smaller elevators versus the large throughput elevators at the export terminals. But we are starting to see a shift on more focus to the export terminals. I don't know if it's with all of the global things that are going on and with all the tourists and all the good stuff, but we're starting to see more of a focus on the export now than we have in the last, I would say, the last year and a half, 2 years. And at those terminals, they want to see, a lot of the inspection records for the ships, that the ships were inspected properly, that there's a lot of throughput at those elevators, but they want to see that that grain being put on that ship, that it's a clean ship, that it was inspected properly and cleaned before that commodity was put on that boat for export.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Our facility only holds and sells packaged feeds. What can we expect during an inspection?
Okay, so yeah, the FSMA does take into account human food, animal food, and pet food. Not just pet food, but feed going out to animals and those things. Those warehouses are really low at the bottom of the list. I don't know what your annual revenue is, but their tiering of when they were going to start those inspections was based on revenue from that company. And those feed warehouses, kind of like the small co-ops or the warehouses that only store the animal feeds, they're pretty low on the list. They're still going to do the same inspections. They want to know who your competent person is, go through your records, want to know where that commodity came from and where all you may be shipping it out to. If it's just being sold local, the inspection is going to be pretty short, probably a couple hours at most, from what I've seen. They focus mostly on your sanitation. If the warehouse is clean, if it looks good, there's not a lot of mice running around, it's going to be a really quick inspection.
Okay, next.
I will say,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I will say that if it's veterinary treated products, then that's a whole nother realm. So there's special feeds that are veterinary feeds that have been, had additives put into it from a vet. And from that standpoint, that's a whole different realm that I'm not very familiar with and can't really comment on. But if it's your basic cattle feed, animal feeds, then they've been a pretty small portion of the audit so far.
Okay, next. What is required for document retention time frame?
What the customers that I deal with are saying 3 years after that grain has left their facility. They keep those records for 3 years. So if you sell your commodity or commodity sold, however it's sold, whether it's going to a flour mill or being sold for a feed commodity. So 3 years after that, I would keep all records minimum. Most customers say 5 years, but 3 years minimum.
Okay, thank you. Next, how would they handle quality control of grain stored in bags?
I mean, they're not going to, I don't know, they can ask to open a bag and take a sample of the inside of some of the bags. I don't know if they're super sacks or if you're talking 50-pound bags of feed or what kind of sacks, but they're going to inspect the warehouse. They're going to look at your records. And as long as everything looks good and you don't have a lot of activity in your warehouse, not seeing issues with your stores, they're probably not going to ask you to cut open bags and pull samples of bags. If they do see insects crawling on the packaging, if they see, gnaw marks from some rodents on some of the pallets, they're probably going to start digging a little further, ask you to cut open some bags so that they can get some more detailed inspections and or pull some samples.
Thank you. Next, should you let them take pictures?
They will ask, unless it's, something proprietary that could harm, something about the way that you do business. You can tell them no, that's protected. Or a lot of facilities, the best way to get around this, I don't know legally that you can tell them no, but what a lot of facilities do is say, cameras aren't allowed on any of our property because it's an explosion hazard. So then they're not allowed to take any pictures out on your facility grounds. And that's the easiest way to get around it. To say cameras aren't allowed out in our facility, dust explosion hazard, electronic device, you can't take any pictures.
Okay, great. Our next question, is the FDA Food Safety Plan Builder only for human food, or is it also for animal feed?
I cannot answer that question. I do not have that data, but if you can, I can do some research. And Kendall, if you can let me know who that is, I can get back with them.
Certainly, I will send that information
forward. Thank you. The ones that I've been involved with, the 3 facilities that I worked with on their FDA plans were for human food.
Okay, our next question. How will they handle inspections of How will they handle inspections of ground piles?
Yes. Ground piles are becoming more and more popular all over the country, especially you get out in Kansas. It seems like that's the preferred method of storage today. Again, if you're doing some type of rodent control around the ground piles, and unless they see something that alerts them that they want to dig into that ground pile, ask you to get them some kind of sample, you got to go through, explain to them that it either involves removing that tarp, puncturing a hole in the tarp, which will require sealing it and possible insect and water entry. You can really talk your way out of them wanting to pull a sample of that ground pile unless they see something that gives them cause for alarm. If they do, you may have to go through the procedures, fill out your appropriate forms, have somebody tie off, get on top of the ground pile, use a probe to pull them a sample. I haven't ever heard of an inspector asking for a sample out of a ground pile. Usually they'll pull it out of a bin or out of a flat storage. But on the ground piles, as long as there's not spilled grain around the ground pile, as long as there's not rotten grain, insect activity or signs of rodent burrowing around the ground pile, they're not going to have any concern or cause for an alarm to want to pull samples and to go through all those steps. Another thing to remember is that they're on a tight time frame. They have hundreds and thousands of facilities to inspect. So if it's something that's going to tie them up for a long time, that it's going to be a very involved process, if they don't have a lot of reason to really pull that sample or to go through all those steps, they're probably not going to. Again, I don't know of anybody that's had to actually, puncture the tarp on a ground pile and pull out any samples for an auditor to date.
Okay, our next question. Have you heard of elevators getting fined because they are not solely engaged in holding grain? For example, they have a packaged feed warehouse on site and they think they are exempt.
No, I have not heard of anyone getting fined for that.
Okay, thank you. Next, do you think we are seeing local elevator inspections increase due to the overall food industry issues with increased food recalls across the United States?
Yes and no. I feel like part of that is what brought about the FSMA regulations. In my elongated talk that I give, every single person in the U.S. is there's no longer the media. We are the media now. So we are causing a lot of our own problems. You see the pictures, oh my God, look at this Taco Bell, it's so nasty. Or, oh my, I shouldn't say company names, I apologize. Take that back. I was at this restaurant, it's so nasty. Or I ate this product and it's making me sick, and everything goes viral immediately. And people are demanding, and everybody is very vocal today more than they were in the past, and demanding things get done. So I think that's what brought a lot about a lot of the FSMA regulations, is that there's so much more oversight and media attention to an issue where it used to be localized. If somebody got sick, then maybe somebody, people in the community would hear about it, and now it's nationwide within minutes. So there's more focus on the grain elevators, and I think it's the larger corporation grain elevators that are getting hit first, and then their FDA is slowly working their way down to the county, local country elevators.
Thank you. Our next question, is it acceptable to tape torn bags?
I think that would be a company policy. I don't know if there's any FDA policy that says you can't tape a torn bag. My recommendation is to tape it, put a date on it, maybe an initial, and if it's been that way for quite a while, I would either try to get rid of that one first, or, if it gets, beyond a certain period of time, then to just discard it. I don't know that, in my personal opinion, if it's a torn bag, I would probably just discard it, then take that risk. But I don't personally know of an FDA rule that says you can't put a piece of tape over a bag, but I probably wouldn't take that risk personally.
Okay, thank you. That is all the time that we have for questions today. I want to thank everyone for their participation. If your question was not answered, it will be sent forward to our presenter following our presentation. That is all that we have for today. I want to go ahead and thank our sponsor, VAA LLC, for their support in bringing you today's webinar. I also want to thank GEAPS and our presenter, Perry Nettles, for joining us today. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available for viewing on gradenet.com within 24 hours. Also, all registrants will receive an email containing a link to our webinar recording. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, November 8th at 10 a.m. Central Time. We will be discussing NFPA 652 standard on the fundamentals of combustible dust for country grain operations. I want to thank you all for attending, and I wish you all a great day.